What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this one, I'm going to be testing Intel's latest, mid-range CPU. This is the i5-14600K, the CPU that Intel have released in aim of battling off Ryzen 7000 lineup and hopefully providing great value mid-range performance once again. Let's do this. Intel's 14th gen is unique in the sense that it's one of the first Intel CPUs in a very long time to be the third refresh of a single architecture. Normally we see a new architecture, a new socket rollout, and that will generally last for 2 generations on the Intel side of things. Take 10th and 11th gen as an example. Then we had 12th and 13th gen. Normally we'd now expect a different socket, with something that's a little bit more from the ground up. This reuses the same socket, meaning existing Z790 motherboards and even Z690 designs are going to be compatible with a BIOS update, and means those with existing builds can upgrade their CPU without the headache that usually comes with a whole new generation. But of course, this more refreshed approach to 14th gen also has its downsides. Gains are mainly focused around clock speed and pushing chips further than ever, something that can be great for gaming performance, but doesn't quite provide a revolutionary change in performance like we saw with Ryzen 7000 versus Ryzen 5000 as an example. It also means as a byproduct these chips do run hot, or more, that you have to have good cooling to get the most out of the CPUs, more so than we've seen in previous generations. But we're going to take a deep dive into the performance, how we can optimize the i5, and whether it's worth it, crucially, compared to its Ryzen alternatives, a little bit later. For now, let's have a look at the other parts that make this build possible. And I've gone for something slightly unique. It's an all-white build for today's video. You wouldn't think this board was white from the box, but I promise you when you open it up, wow, that's a cool looking motherboard, right? This is the Z790 AORUS Pro X. And I have to say, if Z790 refresh boards weren't that exciting, this certainly does a good job of doing something that little bit different. Not only does this board look visually stunning, but we obviously get our Gen 5 NVMe supports with these cool sort of toolless release mechanisms for the heat sinks and the drives themselves. The fact you can take that off with one notch is incredible. Fully white PCB, it's kind of white and light grey in some areas. Your Wi-Fi's included, chipset cooling down the bottom here, and then as far as the I/O goes, this is super impressive. So we've got Wi-Fi 7, which is the latest Wi-Fi standard. It's rapid fast. We've also then got loads of USB 3.2s, Type-Cs. One of these is a 20 gig, one of these is a 10 gig. One's also got DisplayPort if you're using the integrated graphics. 5 gigabit networking on this board as well. It really is very, very impressive. And I actually like what AORUS have done with this particular design. Gigabyte AORUS, fair play. That is a stunning motherboard. Now, I am going to install the CPU, but first, I just want to talk about the graphics card, as I've obviously gone for a matching setup that is going to look awesome. You might think 70 Ti, why have you gone for that particular graphics card against the backdrop of falling AMD GPU prices across the board? On the Nvidia side, there are not many 40 series cards I would actually recommend. The 4070 is outperformed by the 6800 XT for less money, the 4080 by the 7900 XT, and the 7600 is just a bit of a peculiar one, really. And the RTX 4060 as well. We all know how that launch went. Either way though, the 4070 Ti thankfully misses out on some of these criticisms. Originally branded as like a more basic version of the RTX 4080 with slightly less VRAM, you get lots of rasterization firepower, amazing DLSS 3 and ray tracing performance. That's an area that Nvidia seriously do win out over AMD, and 12 gigs of VRAM. So 1440p and even 4K gaming are both plausible on this card now and into the future. I'm making an absolute mess of getting this plastic off, and the cooler looks amazing. This is the Gigabyte Aero model, and I really, really like it. Silver backplate, oh, there's more peels. Oh, beautiful. Really, really like it. 3 fans, good cooling, and the aesthetic, which, as you can see, is going to look absolutely incredible. Now, don't need any of that nonsense. Instead, going to move on to the CPU. With 14 cores, 6 performance, 8 efficiency, and 20 threads, core and thread counts are unchanged from the previous generation 13600K. However, what we do get is more clock speed. Higher boost clocks on this CPU mean as long as you can keep it fairly cool, you shouldn't have too many problems unlocking better single thread, single core performance. RAM is going to be next. I've picked up this nice kit of Vengeance DDR5 from Corsair. Can't go too far wrong with Corsair memory. It's good value, it looks quite nice, very, very widely available. I'll link latest pricing and availability for everything mentioned today down at the links below. You'll be able to find Amazon and Newegg, compare the prices to your heart's content if this is a build you happen to want to set up yourself. There we go, that's in. Make sure that's all nicely clicked. It's looking good already. SSD is next. Now, I have selected the Samsung SSD 990 Pro. If you watch a lot of GeekaWhat videos, you'll probably think, James, didn't you use the 990 Pro last time? And then a video a few weeks ago, and then a video a few weeks before that, and the answer would be yes, I have, because it's so good value and so strong when it comes to performance metrics. It's actually often cheaper than the 980 Pro, which leads me to believe this is more of a 980 Pro replacement than it is a higher spec option. This is where Gigabyte's fancy toolless method comes in. This is really, really impressive. I'm incredibly impressed with what Gigabyte have done here. I really, really think it's something that we just haven't seen from many other brands recently. It's a real nice piece of innovation. So the SSD itself secures with one toolless method. Then the cover goes back on. There we go. Get it lined up. Is that lined up? There we go. Bit of pressure. That's it. How long did that take me? 10 seconds? No little screws. Oh, it's the best implementation I've ever seen of a toolless SSD method. Now, maybe that shows there's not loads to get excited about with Z790 when that is the standout feature, but it's a pretty cool standout feature. Anyway, before I move this motherboard assembly into the case, I am going to do some cooler prep, and I have selected the Corsair iQ-H15 Elite Capellix XT. Now, I'll save my criticisms of Intel 14th Gen for a little bit later, so bear with me or skip to them using the timestamps below. But if there's one thing you really need to pay attention to with this generation, it is cooling. We saw dramatic differences of performance, particularly on the i9, but on the i5 too, when running with higher and lower power coolers. In fact, the i9 failed to hit the boost clock speeds that Intel advertised with a 360mm high-end all-in-one liquid cooler, where the fans were running super quick, the pump was on max. We actually had to notch up to a 420mm AIO cooler on the 14900K to see the right boost performance, and an increase subsequently in rendering performance on the multi-core over the 13900K. So something to be aware of, and we're going to be proactive. For this build, 360mm rad, spend the extra $40. I promise you, it is worth it. Now, that's enough selling 360mm coolers to you. Going to prep some mounting hardware. So, inside the cooler, you'll find 4 posts like this, and also an Intel LGA backplate. Now, this is going to go behind each of these 4 holes with the posts screwing on top. This will provide the mounting basis to actually add the cooler on a little bit later. I'm then going to move this to one side because it's case time. I have gone for this, the Hyte Y40. Now, in many respects, this Hyte Y40 is a bit of an underdog in the Hyte range. The Y60 is the real star of the show, but this thing is actually quite a nice mid-tower. I think compared to a lot of mid-towers on the market, it's actually better, easier to build in, and a bit more flexible. There are certainly cheaper options out there for sure, and the Y60 is a nice upgrade if you're willing to spend that bit more money. But it is quite a bit more money, so this is going to work perfectly for the build today. The only major thing to note with this case is about the airflow. You've got to be careful how you optimize it. You do get the intake fans at the bottom, but because the power supply is there, it's kind of a little bit redundant. Therefore, you'll want to use these as your intake fans at the side, with the radiator in exhaust at the top. That's going to ensure we have enough airflow and temperatures stay low. Move out the vertical GPU mount and then lay the case down flat for the next step. Then the motherboard is going to slide in. Now, looking at things, all the standoffs appear to be in the right locations, meaning it should just be a case of carefully sliding the motherboard in, line it all up. Oh, look at that. 9 screws to go in, 3 at the top, 3 down the middle, 3 down at the bottom, and the motherboard will be secured into place. I could also add in at this stage the PCIe extension piece. It looks like going to go in the second slot, so I will need to do a bit of shifting around of PCI lanes and stuff while I screw the motherboard in. But it's all going to go in A-OK without too many problems. While the case is flat, I'm also going to pop in the CPU cooler. That's going to go at the top, so hopefully a quick toolless removal, there we are, lovely, of the top panel, and the 360mm rad will go up here in exhaust mode. It's the only place we can actually secure a 360mm rad in this case, which is why I'm installing it where I am. Fans are going to go on the inside of the case for the best airflow, and also because they look a lot better that way. Water block goes on at the end, 4 thumb screws to fasten down, and it's basically done. Really, really quite simple. Corsair are one of the easiest brands generally to install as far as AIOs go, especially on the Intel platform. The graphics card is then the next part of the build, and I'm so excited. I can't wait to see how this thing looks. Now, as you can see, one of the trademark features is this, the vertical GPU mount as standard. Let me line the card up. Oh, remember to take the black plastic protector off. Oh, here we go. Come on, you beauty. Oh, My word. Couple of things left to do, obviously power and stuff like that, but I think also we need to go ahead and put the RGB fans in here. They're the white Corsair QL fans that will go behind the GPU just to accent everything, make things look a bit more kind of within the white colour scheme. But so far, so good. The final bit then to pop in is the power supply. I've picked up this Cooler Master V850i Gold ATX3 PCI Gen 5 power connector, making cable management for our 4070 Ti in white nice and easy. And I'm also going to add in some cheap, easy DIY fab cable extensions for good measure, because for $25, it makes the whole build tie in that little bit better. Nice, compact, standard ATX power supply. The gold accents don't really fit with the build, but it will be hidden away, meaning we haven't got to splurge on a more expensive, white, or sleeker designed unit. Look at that. Isn't that a sight to behold? Fans and intake here, fans and exhaust at the top, one and intake at the bottom. What a beauty. We need to see how well the i5 performs. Let's see how good this thing looks though in a GeekaWhat montage first of all, and I'll rejoin you in just a few seconds. As far as performance goes, I'm going to start by looking at some synthetic CPU-specific benchmarks, then working through to the gaming performance of this build to properly evaluate the 14600K. In Cinebench R23, we achieved a multi-score score of 24,743. This was higher than the 13600K of last generation, but not particularly by enough to write home about anytime soon. The result was similar in Cinebench R23 Single Thread 2, with the 14600K beating out the i5-13600K and not much else. Intel's 13th and 14th gen always look strong when it comes to our benchmarks. And again, the 14th gen i5 is not a bad chip. It's just not particularly different from the 13th gen chip that it's supposed to replace. In 3D Mark's CPU profile, this was once again a similar story. We impressively beat out chips like the 5900X Ryzen processor as one example, and of course the i5 from last gen, but only by tiny margins, and certainly not enough to warrant this CPU's price tag over its predecessor competitors. Couple of final synthetic benchmarks, 3D Mark's Times by Extreme. Again, 8,000 was the score here. That was up a measly 200 if that from the last gen i5-13600K, while 3D Mark's Firestrike is a similar story. Hardly anything you're going to be excited about anytime soon, and that I think is the biggest problem with these CPUs. It's not that they're bad CPUs, they're just not particularly new. And why would you buy these when you could buy a i5-13600K and save yourself a bit of cash? If they are pretty like for like on price though, and you decide that 14th gen is the way to go, how does it perform with the 4070 Ti in this build? Well, I tested out Starfield first of all and was pleasantly surprised. 1440p high, and the build pulled in 87 FPS. Not bad really, when you consider how difficult this game is to run. Hogwarts Legacy at 1440p high again performed well, 112 FPS on average, with strong 90 and 99th percentile results. Warzone 2, 1440p high with DLSS set to quality. DLSS, of course, the main advantage of a card like the 4070 Ti over its AMD competition, and the build achieved just shy of 146 FPS. 134 and 126 for the 90 and 99th percentiles showed consistent frame rates throughout, and I was pretty impressed with the gaming performance of this build. Fortnite at 1080p competitive is the similar story. 295 FPS at basically 1080p low except the render distance, which is obviously tuned to far to ensure the most competitive visual experience and maximize the frame rate. Apex Legends at 1440p high, and the build achieved 241 FPS on average. Once again, pretty good, no complaints here whatsoever. While the latest edition of F1, the 2023 title at 1440p ultra high settings, delivered 172 FPS on average. The i5-14600K then, not a bad CPU, but just because it's got a bigger number than the 13600K doesn't mean it's exactly better. A disappointing launch, but a solid build, and I'll leave all the parts that make this build possible at the first links in the description below. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.